Witches and fairy doctors have a long history in Ireland, and the terms didn't always mean what they mean now. A witch could merely be a woman well-versed in the use of plant medicine and healing techniques. A cunning woman or man, as the term was often used in England. It was only later during the witch hysterias of the 16th and early 17th centuries that it came to mean someone bent on evil. Most stories concerning them are flavored strongly by the latter tradition, but not all. It could be fairly said that the only difference between a witch and a cunning woman or man was their intent, a fine distinction that the witch-finders weren't interested in making. The fairy doctor was a little more specialized and a bit more obscure. They were not fairies themselves, but were believed to have knowledge from the fairies, directly or indirectly. Like the cunning woman above, they had special knowledge of herbs and natural medicines, in this case with emphasis on curing afflictions caused by the good people. Traditionally, it was very easy to get on the bad side of the fae. Anything from strokes, called elf shot, to lameness or worse were believed caused by either inadvertently or carelessly or, and heaven help you, deliberately offending them. Since it was often impossible to know if one had done either of the first two, the fairy doctor's services were usually in demand, and that included for mischief allegedly done by witches, not the fairies. In this video, we'll be exploring examples from both traditions. The following two accounts were first recorded by folklorist Lady Jane Wilde in the 19th century. There was a woman of the islands who was extremely knowledgeable of herbs. She was skilled in curing all ailments, but she kept the knowledge to herself and did not share it with anyone. Nor did she allow others to witness what herbs she gathered and how they were treated. If this seemed selfish of her, know that there was a reason for it, and greed was not that reason. One day, a man who had heard of her powers came over in a boat with two friends to seek her help. He had suffered what seemed at the time a very minor fall, yet from that day forward one of his legs was completely paralyzed. The lady knew they were coming, because she also had the power of divination she had learned from the fae. She had his medicine prepared for him before he even arrived, and when he did, she told him to enter, that all was ready, and he would be cured by her power and her medicine. The man bowed politely and told her what had happened to him. He was walking in the mountains and slipped and fell. She told him she knew already. The problem was that he had accidentally stepped on a fairy herb under which some fairies were resting. He had caved in their roof and annoyed them, and so they had lamed him in revenge, but it was of no matter. Her powers were greater than theirs, and she could cure him. She gave him the medicine she had prepared and told him to take it alone and in silence when he returned home. If he did as she said, he would be cured in 3 days' time. The man offered her silver in payment, but she refused. She would take no money, as she said, because she could not sell her knowledge. She could only give it in the cure she created, for otherwise her power would be sold as well and leave her. Later a message was sent to her from the man saying he had done as she directed and he was completely cured. He then sent her a generous gift in gratitude, for a gift was not the same as payment and could do no harm. In Ireland, witchcraft was believed to be widely practiced in the matter of butter and milk, two very important staples in the life of farming communities. For instance, it was dangerous to give milk to someone you didn't know well and trust completely. The reason was milk given with consent was almost all that a witch needed to cast a spell to make your cows go dry. As for butter, that was a separate matter. In this case, it involves a witch and a dead man's hand. The story goes that a young man of the islands married a woman from the mainland. She was a tall, dark-haired woman who spoke but little, but was otherwise polite. She minded her own business and seemed to fit in well enough. That changed when, on market days, she would always appear with far more butter to sell than any of the other farm wives, even those who had more cows than she did. Her large stash of butter allowed her to undersell all the others and make more money. Naturally, this led to whispers about exactly how she was managing this, because it could not be anything natural. The villagers knew roughly how much butter could be produced per volume of milk, and it just did not add up. After some questioning of those who had reason to know, it was discovered that the woman always churned her butter alone and would not allow anyone, even her husband, to see her doing it. One brave girl volunteered to find out the truth. Just before the woman was getting ready to churn, the girl used her small size to slip through a tiny window and hide under a bed in the churning room. From there she could see what the woman did. At first the churning seemed to go normally, but after a while the woman walked over to a locked box, opened it, and produced a dead man's hand. With this she stirred the contents of the churn while muttering incantations. When she finished, the churn was full nearly to overflowing with butter. This action she repeated several times until she had no more containers to hold the butter. When the woman left the room, the girl managed to slip away unseen, and now the secret was out. It was a well-known bit of witch lore that a dead man's hand, used properly, could greatly increase the product of the churn. In no time the villagers had surrounded the woman's home and demanded to see the dead man's hand. The woman denied everything but delayed letting them look. When the villagers were finally allowed in, they did not find a dead man's hand, but did smell burning flesh. It was clear to all present that the hand had been destroyed. There was no proof, but everyone in the village knew. While there were no legal consequences, the woman and her husband were shunned in the village and eventually moved away, and no one knew what became of them. Sometimes, neither the cunning woman nor the fairy doctor could handle the situation, and so one was forced to go directly to the source. This is a tale first recorded by the folklorist Patrick Kennedy in 1870. There was once a midwife named Nora who had a daughter with a sore leg. This affliction had kept the girl confined to her bed for nearly a year. The medical doctor and the ferryman had both been called, and neither could find the cause of it. In her own way, Nora was a cunning woman herself, but she was likewise helpless. While Nora pondered what could be done, one night she received a summons. A dark man on a dark horse came to her door with word that his wife was having a difficult birth, and could she come at once? There was something about the man that made Nora uneasy, but she couldn't refuse to help a woman in need. She mounted the horse behind the dark man and was soon brought to a marvelous palace. By this time, Nora suspected that she was in the presence of the Fae. She entered a grand hall, and her suspicions were confirmed. She met an old neighbor there who had disappeared years before and was strongly believed to have been kidnapped by the fairies. He told her what to expect, that the dark man was the king of the fairies himself, whose queen was in labor. He also whispered a warning. He said to take neither refreshment nor food while she was there, nor to accept any gold or treasure in return for her work. The only thing she could safely accept was a cure for any malady inflicted by wicked spirits or the fairies themselves. Nora was soon ushered to the queen's bedchamber, where the lady was in a hard labor. Nora set to work, and with her skills the queen was safely delivered of a healthy baby girl. The pleased and relieved queen offered Nora gold, refreshment, a lovely shawl, and even the chance to live among them forever. But Nora remembered her neighbor's warning and politely but very firmly refused them all. The queen insisted that she must reward Nora somehow, so Nora told the queen about her daughter's malady and said all she wanted was the cure. At this the queen was somewhat agitated and told Nora to ask for something, anything other than that. Nora would not budge. The queen finally revealed how Nora's daughter had offended them. The fairies liked to travel at night and visit homes that were clean with a well-swept hearth. That night, almost a year ago, they had chosen her home, and since the fairies could control their size, her entire court was ready to take tea near Nora's hearth. Nora's daughter had come sleepily into the room at just that time and accidentally made the queen spill her tea. The queen had been so angry she had thrown the pot at her, and a small sliver of the spout had become lodged in Nora's daughter's leg. Nora carefully pointed out that her daughter had meant no harm, could not have known they were there, and punishing a clumsy girl so severely for an unintended insult was perhaps a bit excessive. After some reflection, the queen saw Nora's point, and owing to the gratitude she still felt, The queen relented and gave Nora an ointment that would cure the leg. When Nora returned home, she applied the ointment as the queen had directed. Soon a small patch of skin on the girl's leg burst as a tiny sliver of a teapot spout emerged. Her daughter immediately felt better. Nora told her daughter the whole story. From that day on, the daughter was still careful to clean and sweep as the fairies preferred. However, also from that day forward, she would never, ever enter a room with a hearth after dark for as long as she lived. Now, one might well ask why the Fae, with their great knowledge of magic and medicine, would need a human midwife in the first place. Apparently they did, since there are multiple accounts that have come down to us similar to this one. Yet it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Fairies are either immortal or extremely long-lived, so it follows that they would need to reproduce only rarely. Mortals, on the other hand, well, let's just state the obvious that in this one area, we've had a great deal more practice than they have.